There's many arguments that are used against capitalism, one of which happens to be on innovation. Of course, the argument on innovation isn't so black and white, because you could go back to the periods of, the ancient Roman Empire, or of course of ancient Greece, and you will find even those periods were very innovative, although there was things that were very restrictive and held people back. You take, for example, the belief that the earth was flat. Just have a listen to what Viki 1999 goes on to explain here.
Hello everybody, today we're gonna talk about capitalism and innovation and why they aren't as related as you may think. I got this comment here by Eli, asking me to make a video about worker co-ops and how to implement them while keeping innovation. They make a very interesting point about how to achieve socialism using workers gradually taking over the company rather than forbidding private ownership in general. They will include those points in my video about worker co-ops. But what I'm more interested in right now are the parts of the comment that imply that innovation needs capitalism. To me, that shows that even people who advocate for socialism can still believe that capitalism somehow leads to innovation. And that's what this video is about, to explain why capitalism doesn't really create innovation at all. Let's go over how people who support capitalism think it works. Let's say we have two rival businesses and we call them red and blue. They both sell the same product, just in different colors. But since there aren't enough customers in the region to sustain both of the shops, they must compete.
She doesn't comprehend the fact that businesses are solely reliant upon that of their consumers. If they haven't got many consumers, either the business is struggling financially and is going to end up eventually going under, or of course the business might just be starting out. And if businesses have that of competition, then of course there must be something there that consumers want in order for businesses to survive. They need to be able to provide a service that consumers benefit from. So if there's not many consumers around and you've got these two businesses, what that's telling you is the market is elsewhere. It's telling you consumers' demand is elsewhere, and these two businesses would not last. They would eventually go under because these businesses are reliant upon consumers' demand.
How are they going to go about that? Well, they have multiple options. They could, for example, cut costs and force their employees to work for less money in order to lower the prices of the product to get more customers.
So this is the next problem with Viki's argument. She doesn't understand that businesses are competing with one another for skilled labour. Businesses have to compete, of course, to hold on to their skilled labour, so they have to pay higher wages on the skilled labour. The second thing, of course, you've probably heard the argument where some come out and say about dangerous products. They can just produce whatever they like, put out dangerous products in market, but they completely ignore the fact that businesses have reputation. Businesses can't just produce whatever the hell they like, throw it out there in the market and hope for the best. You rely upon your customers. If your customers get dangerous products, you'll lose customers and that will lose your profits. Same goes for that of employees. You heavily rely upon your employees. If employees get injured or whatever in the workplace, if it's a dangerous workplace, of course, they will be forced, the business, to pay compensation. That costs them. Viki doesn't specifically speak about the dangerous workplace. Businesses have a reputation to look after. You damage the reputation of your business, you're facing losses. You face the danger of your competition, of course, wiping the floor with you. If a business in that scenario has very little consumers, how are they going to attract more? They're going to have to look after their business. They're going to have to grow their business by producing what consumers do want. It's not as simple as just saying they would cut the costs. Of course, businesses could achieve this, but it's not a case that, just reducing prices. You've probably heard the argument about predatory pricing. It doesn't work in the real world. We saw that with, of course, Herbert Dow's chemical company. The German cartel tried that stunt where, they would reduce the prices, and eventually the German cartel was forced to surrender because all Herbert Dow was doing was simply buying up at a cheaper cost. He sent out agents to the German cartel and was buying up the bromine at a cheaper cost and selling it off at a higher price. It defies this theory that, of course, businesses can just reduce their price, wipe out competition, etc. It's as if to say, businesses can just, get away with doing whatever they like. How you're going to reduce your prices, how you're going to reduce costs, etc. is by mass producing. If anything, that's going to benefit the consumer. You're not just going to produce whatever you like and produce however much you like, because otherwise you would be producing waste and it wouldn't benefit the business. And it's not not really as simple as just a case that you just reduce everybody's wages and that just saves them money. Yeah, I mean that is of course if you ignore the fact that competition is competing with one another for skilled labour, and it's your skilled labour who's going to make you a greater return, because of course the skilled labour knows what they're doing in their specific job. They're going to benefit the business. Another thing, folk, in terms of reducing workers' wages, you rely upon a good team within your business. You rely upon good workers. You rely upon people who have an incentive to work hard. So of course, again in relation to skilled labour, the benefit they have is if you have a good relationship with your workers, if they're getting paid good wages or whatever, that can pass off onto that of the consumers and then attract more consumers. Viki 1999 bases that assumption. She just assumes that if you just reduce that of the workers' wages, then of course you would attract consumers. That isn't the case. Consumers are only going to be attracted if you're producing something of value, which is of course to say something that they want, something that they would be willing to pay for. I mean, for all you know, you could produce whatever the hell you like. There's no guarantee that what you produce is going to be of any value to the consumer. And why would you just produce anything? It's going to come at a cost. It costs you to produce more. So if you're producing more and you're producing something that consumers don't want, there's no point. So what attracts consumers is, first of all, you have to look at how the workers are, how they treat their consumers. The second thing, of course, is producing what consumers do want. It's all to do with customer service. And of course, competition within their market research department, they're going to analyse what other businesses in the same field in the market and what they're doing. Another thing to note there, people, is the assumption that if you just cut people's wages, this will then allow them to reduce their prices, and then it's a case that they would attract more customers. Again, it's a misunderstanding of economics in relation to do with the laws of supply and demand. How you reduce the prices of goods and services to attract more customers is by producing more. She doesn't acknowledge the fact that businesses are competing for skilled labour. And if you've got a business reputation to look after, you're going to need skilled labour. You're going to need a strong workforce. If you don't look after any of that, then of course your business is going to suffer in the long run, especially having a poor reputation. And of course customers will then get those products, and if they're not happy with the products, you're going to lose customers. So it's not really as black and white as what Viki's making out to be.
Or they could focus on making a better product than their competitor and get more customers that way. The capitalist idea is that since lowering the price can't go on forever without eventually making a loss, businesses will end up having to improve the product to convince people to buy it.
Cost of producing things, etc., is not the same thing as the price. And if anything, businesses are restricted to what consumers are willing to pay for something. And businesses always have to look at a target market. It was a bit like the argument what was made by ContraPoints on the $2,000 pizza, or whoever the big high-end street companies are, like these high-end street, clothing companies. They have a target market. They target the type of market of people who do have a lot of money, therefore that was their own business choice. So you take, for example, Frasers. Frasers are a company that sells, £800 goods, etc., like bags and whatnot. That's their own free choice of who their target market is. And of course, so long as they have consumers going and buying their goods, then they must have people willing to pay for that. So it's whatever price they can get away with. It's not a case that a business can just set whatever price they like and they just get away with it. So the only reason why a $2,000 pizza sells that's gold is because they must have a market there somewhere of specific type of people, a specific type of person that's going and buying the $2,000 gold pizza. Why would someone do that? That's their free choice. I would never understand them. There's no getting away from the fact that consumers have the free choice to go and buy a $2 pizza or a $5 pizza next door. There's nothing stopping them. It's really all down to, when it comes to price, what businesses are going to put out there. Businesses are not going to reduce their prices below production, the cost. So in other words, this is the problem that Viki doesn't understand. She doesn't comprehend the difference between cost and price. You have a cost of running your business. You have a cost of your production. It's going to cost you to produce the goods. Why would you then set your price below your costs? Maybe it costs you £100 to produce one product. Well, you would not reduce your prices below £100. Why would you? You would be making a loss. In the real world of economics, you are going to have to sell at a higher price than what your costs are. That's what we mean in terms of costs. It's not the same thing as price. Viki confuses that.
Unfortunately, that's not how this actually works. Let's do a thought experiment. You are one of the capitalists in our example. You are the blue business owner and want to compete with the filthy reds. You could try to reduce the payment of your employees so you can lower the price of your product, but unfortunately the workers formed a union and won't accept that from you, so lowering the cost is not an option. What else can you do? You could take a lot of money, give it to researchers and scientists and tell them to improve your product in some unspecified way. There are two problems with that idea. One is that genuine research is extremely time consuming, and the other is that it's really expensive. So while you're investing a lot of money into making a better product that won't be on the market for a few more years, your competitor can lower his prices since he doesn't spend money on research.
There is the assumption from Viki's part, giving a lot of money to the researchers and scientists would, cost a lot of money. I suppose if you put it in today's perspective, again, it might be different than that in a free market. But even at that, a business is going to do so because if they want to improve their product, they will do that because it will benefit them in the long run, especially if they wish to beat their competition in many regards, and businesses do just that. But of course, the assumption was that the other business would then lower their prices and all of a sudden it would just wipe out their competition. The other business would have the luxury of just concentrating, lowering the prices, and there was nothing the other business can do because the other business is too busy concentrating, investing into that of research and stuff like that. Well, there's the issue, because what is to stop the business that's paying for the research and the scientists, etc., to find something new or whatever, to improve something? What's to stop them from buying up at a cheaper price from the other competitor? What Viki explained was that from the two businesses, they're both producing the same product. If this other business is going to lower their prices, what's to stop what Herbert Dow did? What's to stop that business from then buying that other business's goods up at a cheaper price just by sending in agents, buying up the goods at a cheaper price and selling them off at the higher price? In the long run, that business is going to come up with something that improves the product, will be in relation to what the market research department had done. What did the market research department do? The market research department listened to the consumers. The consumers said, here's what we want, here's the improvements we would like to see on the product. So the market research departments went away. They've then, as a business, collectively decided to invest in things that will, improve that product. So that's why in the long run they would invest in such, researchers, etc. They will do so because that is essentially what is going to improve their business. Now, in today's market, where there's somewhat of an oligopoly and a monopoly, etc., then there's less of that competition because you're not living in a free market economy. It's not as competitive. Competition's been strangled half to death, which is why you're seeing problems today. But in a free market, you've got little to no option but to abide by what consumers want. And if you don't listen to your consumers, good luck trying to run a business. At the end of the day, consumers will go elsewhere and get what they want.
But what other options do you have? What else could you do to convince people to buy your product? If only there was some part of the economy completely dedicated to making people buy stuff. Oh yeah, marketing. You can just tell everybody that your product is better than your competitors without actually making a better product.
Again, Viki's bold assumption is this idea that they can just then invest into marketing. Well, part of that marketing really is to do with that. They correlate with that of the research and seeking to innovate. But marketing is not cheap. It comes at a very heavy cost. And if businesses are going to have to market their business in the right way, they have to reflect what the consumers want. Who do you think the market research department listens to? The market research department has to collect information from the consumers, from what they're spending on. What are the consumers doing? That's what market research departments are interested in. They want to see what consumers want. They also want to see what other businesses are doing. They're thinking to themselves, how can we improve our business? So they're not just going to ignore the consumer. They're going to spend in what they think the consumers want. They're going to spend and invest in the market research, because market research departments are going to, analyse what other competitors are doing. So they don't just turn a blind eye to them. They analyse what they're doing. So if market research departments are going to analyse what consumers want, at the end of the day, that correlates to the whole investment in the research, because it's what consumers want. And if you don't listen to your consumers, they'll go elsewhere.
So what do? Do you invest a lot of time and money into research that could maybe one day result in a better product? Or do you just advertise your product as better? I think you'll agree that advertisement is the better idea in that case, won't you?
The other part of this bold assumption, and it's based off this corporatist system you see today, where certain companies are getting away with that because of the lack of competition, not because of competition, because of the lack of it. But it's this bold assumption that businesses can just do whatever they like, advertise it as something spectacular, throw it out there in the market, and not really make much improvements, just advertise it as something brilliant, it's all this, that, and the next thing. But the reality is, in a real fiercely competitive market, are consumers going to waste their time and money and produce on a company, pay for things that, of course, have got a poor reputation? No, they're not. They're going to turn to that of the other competitors who produce something better that's more reliable. And that's what happens in a free market. This assumption that, of course, what you see today, where certain businesses are not improving, they would get eaten alive in a free market. The only reason why they're surviving today is because there's an oligopoly. The only reason why they're surviving today is because there's a monopoly over the market. That's why they survive. Companies like Apple would be booted up the backside if they ever, entered into a free market economy. And the reason why they would get booted up the backside is because if they don't improve, they would be the ones making losses. They would be in serious trouble.
It's cheaper and quicker, and most people will actually believe that you made a better product than the competitor if you just tell them often enough. And that's why capitalists really don't innovate at all. But then, who does the research and who does innovate? If it's not profitable, why does technology advance at all? Well, I'll tell you. Public research universities and research institutes do. They're the ones who innovate. They do research that takes years and costs millions. And who pays for it? Well, we do. Everybody does. Through taxes. Most research is financed by the state, not private investors.
The idea of public research through that of universities, it would be done through that of central planning. It's based on this idea that they would just take all this money from the taxpayer, they would go into the research. What are they going to have to research? They have to research on what the market wants. You don't have that information. That's the point of capitalism. Capitalism is the market. If you have the consumers demanding and driving production, that is capitalism. There's no two ways about it. If you don't have the information of consumers' needs and wants, how the hell do you know what you're researching in order to build things? You've no guarantee that what you're going to produce, that what you innovate or whatever it is going to be of any benefit. I can give you a prime example of this, and it was a fantastic example. The government had innovated what was the intranet. It was inefficient. It was piss poor. It was used for the military. And it wasn't until the market came along with that of the internet, the World Wide Web, that made it efficient. Had it not been for the market, it would never have been efficient. You can innovate things all you want, but you're hoping for the best. It's sheer luck if you produce something and innovate something based off public research. But what's public research going to be reliant upon? Public research itself is going to rely upon what the consumers drive in terms of production. You need the information of people's needs and wants. You can't just act as a central planner and centrally plan what gets produced, because that's exactly what leads to waste, because, like I've explained before on the economic calculation problem, you don't hold the information of profits and losses. So there's no information there in order to, create for the consumer. So you can't just hope for the best and innovate for what central planners think is best for the people. The people When you're talking about a 65 million populated country, 65 million people don't all want the same thing. 65 million people are all different from one another. They're all individuals with their own needs and wants. And it was pretty much like that with government's innovations in specific areas. The other thing that I find truly magical, however, is you say, oh, we do through the taxes. Well, at the end of the day, that implies that you require money in the economy. And where's the money going to come from through taxpayers' money? Well, you've just insinuated there that you require that of the private sector.
Think of the MIT and NASA. Those aren't for profit, but state financed, and this allows them to advance science without focusing on the profit. But what about iPhones, I hear you ask? Well, the iPhone sure was an impressive piece of tech at its time. It was the first device that used touchscreen. They had a completely revolutionary type of battery that could hold more charge than any battery before that, and they had impressive modern microprocessors and cameras, right? Well, kind of. In reality, all of those things were decades old at this point. Touchscreens were invented in the 1960s by this guy. The lithium battery was invented by this man in the 70s, and all of the work on microchips was done by many people employed by universities all across the world. And none of those made millions of what they created. Jobs just took the fruits of their labor and made profit of it. They got cucked by a man in a turtleneck sweater. And not one screw on the iPhone was Steve Jobs' idea. And on top of that, the iPhone wasn't even the first device to use touchscreens anyway. The Nintendo DS used them in 2004. The first phone to use touchscreen was the LG Predator in 2007, just a few weeks before the iPhone.
There's no getting away from the very fact that through, specific individuals that come up with such innovative things, and over the years technology may have taken influence from older products, maybe of the 1960s, 1970s, and have certainly advanced, etc. And certain people have just taken these ideas and certainly improved upon things. But that is, again, one of these things that's a misunderstanding of what profits are. Profits are not just something that you fill your own pockets with. In their mind, it's just this black and white thing that it's just a case that a business makes a surplus, that's it. They do not understand that profits are signals. There's no denying the fact that, touchscreen technology came as an idea. It just happened to be one of those things that people would take to. It's one of those things that things aren't so black and white. We're not saying that specific individuals in the public sector cannot innovate. They've got the intelligence to do so. What we're saying is the fact you've no guarantee that what you're going to produce is going to be of any value to that of the consumer. It's a bit like that of the intranet. It's a bit like saying businesses can just produce whatever they like, throw it out there in the market and just, consumers will buy it. No, that isn't the real world. Not to say that, the public sector and people in that, because they're individuals. Even individuals work inside the public sector. That's not to say they cannot innovate things. A lot of what you see today, they analyse from the market.
Steve Jobs just bought the patents to research projects the state had paid for over years and pretended to be visionary for it. In reality, there was nothing innovative about the iPhone. Every part of it already existed and would have done so without Apple as a company even existing.
I wouldn't say that's entirely true with regards to technology. Yes, there's been many foundations from the past that's helped grow and that's enabled such touchscreen technology, etc. to come around. There's no denying that fact. But in terms of the innovation within the applications, etc., it's not entirely based off of it just came from, the past. There's certain things that have came around and certainly improved the iPhone over years.
And the same is true for every innovation in history. The ones who profit from an innovation aren't the ones who paid for it. Thousands have become rich from air travel, but nobody invested into the Wright brothers because experimenting was too expensive.
Again, I wouldn't say that's entirely true. There has been periods where the market has been left be to itself, and there's even periods where, in freedom from government's intervention, the likes of Henry Ford didn't come up with his automobile industry because of government. He certainly come up with that because of his own innovative mind, and there's been many individuals like that. You could even look at John Davis and Rockefeller and the innovative things that he did in order to improve the oil industry at that time. So it's not true. And it's a black and white argument to say that, the public sector is innovative and here's the private sector, it's not innovative. I think it ignores the very fact that human beings are individuals, and if specific individuals are very smart, they can come up with certain things, regardless of public or private sector. But it's true to state that through the private sector, there is certainly far more incentive if there is the freedom for people to think for themselves. That just happens to be the case, and again, you cannot ignore, you have to rely upon what the market wants, especially when innovating and producing things. You're heavily dependent upon what people want. So here are some of the comments that I got on my previous video. John Parr says, Scotty, remember years ago I voted yes on independence. I said to you that I thought that was the best. Well, you will be happy to hear that I really do regret my vote, because I totally understand and realise now it was a vote for the EU, a sneaky lot those SNP are. I'm now for Britain, crazy for me, but I changed my mind, grew up all my days as a total rabid SNP geezer. Well, this is the thing, John, with the whole thing in Scottish independence. It was never so much to me to do with the whole thing whether Scotland would separate or not. My argument, and I was even in the Facebook groups of both the yes and no, and I dared to even question and argue with both of them, and I pointed out the very fact that socialism cannot be democratic, cannot be libertarian. One side, a lot of no voters, you've seen them carrying the Labour Party posters and stuff like that, and I'm thinking, nah, that doesn't work. And I tried to explain that to them. The Yes campaign in favour of things that are more NHS, more social security, higher tax rates, etc, etc. A lot of folk kept on turning to Norway, Sweden, Denmark. They don't understand these countries. And when people were saying, oh well, Westminster's, no longer serving us and we'll finally get a government we vote for, Nicola Sturgeon was arguing for stronger government regulation over the private sector. She came out and said that. She came out and said that in her words. In her own exact words, she said she wanted strong government regulation over the private sector, etc, etc. Is strangling the private sector half to death. And that's nothing at all like Denmark. Because Denmark in 2001 strongly deregulated. A lot of these people despise Thatcher. They said that she caused, all this mess because of deregulation and privatisation. I'm thinking to myself, geez, the economy was heavily nationalised before Thatcher. It was never the cause of the banking crisis through deregulation, and financial regulation actually increased under Thatcher, so it was never the truth. The whole thing in Scottish independence was never black and white, and I had never had a problem with people that wanted Scotland to go its own way. It was just the sad fact that a lot of folk, unfortunate as it is to say, have been brainwashed, have been conditioned to believe free education, free healthcare, free prescriptions, free this, free that, free means more affordable, because they've been told this over and over and over and over. They've been told by government, they've been told by the mainstream media, they've been told by the education system, free this and free that means it's more affordable, and it's not. It's not more affordable. It isn't, and they've been lied to. That's what frustrates me. It's not them I'm frustrated with. It's the education system. It's the mainstream media. And that is such a crying shame, because Scotland is a country that we can be very proud of. Look at what Scotland innovated. Look at what Scotland has done throughout history. Scotland has got so much to be proud of. And I will say, I did a lot of videos on Scottish stuff, Scottish accent, whatever. I was staunchly proud to be Scottish. But what really ripped my heart out was the fact that when I got to understand a lot of things, I saw how far removed people in this country have become, and it's no their fault. It's the fault of the entire education system and everything. The likes of Nicola Sturgeon and that, the SNP, etc., they've embarrassed Scotland. I used to boast off about Scotland being the country, the world leaders of medicine and education, and now it's a country that's brainwashed by all this collectivist nonsense, and I would only hope that Scotland can change. Peewee mentions the store owner's first reason to open up the store is to profit, to make money, to benefit himself. He didn't really do it for you, not primarily anyway, and your first reason to pay him is to get the Sprite so you can feel refreshed, to benefit yourself. You didn't really pay him just because you wanted to give him your money, not primarily anyway. That's what capitalism is. It's individuals peacefully and voluntarily exchanging the valuable fruits of one's own time and labour with one another in the means of acting in one's self-interest. I think that's a very interesting point, especially on the human nature. Adam Smith had mentioned before himself on the agree self-interest, and you're absolutely right in what you say. When it comes down to people, when they hand money over, it's not a case that, oh, they just wanted to give the money. It's a case that they actually went into a shop, they had the self-interest of what they wanted to get, they went over to the counter and they handed the money over. It just so happens to be that both of them in that exchange benefit from that exchange. And that's the beauty of capitalism. It's a case that self-interest is often looked at something as very greedy, and that isn't the case. The voluntary exchange, both parties, if they agree upon the exchange, both parties benefit from it. You're absolutely right in what you state, and it's a very good point. Again, Peewee goes on to say, last time I argued with that little kid, mouthy infidel, about communism, he said the death and destruction under communist systems weren't caused by communism, and it was because of natural disasters and blah blah blah. When I replied by saying, would you agree that communism is about equal distribution of the fruits of one's own labour? Well, let me ask you this. What would happen if an individual refuses to give you his fruits of his own labour? How are you going to make him give it away without forcing him to? You have to force him at gunpoint to work, and then force him at gunpoint to give you his fruits of his own labour. I also enlightened him to the collective agriculture enforced by collectivist pseudo-scientific propaganda like lysenkoism and how it caused the 2 million deaths by starvation. He didn't respond. Again, it's a very reasonable point. What people don't realise, you cannot have socialism without coercion. You have to force getting rid of the private sector. It has to be done through violence. I mean, how are you going to get people to do the things? It's not just a case that, everybody just goes and does their own thing. You have to force people into a collective group. You have to subordinate the private sector, and that's done through coercion. And when you remove the government, you remove all law, rules, and all the rest of it, individuals go and do their own thing in the self-interest. The Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, you saw exactly that. People were going and doing their own thing, and then before you know it, all these fights were breaking out. It's just how human nature is. People just disagree with one another. People see things differently for one another, and it's always the case. Just like in that circumstance, then yes, you're absolutely right. Aden Sahit goes on to say, but Scotty, the problem with free markets is the indirect communications between the consumers and the providers. That's simply not true, Aden. Misunderstanding of the free markets, a misunderstanding of what drives production. The producers are dependent upon the consumers. How do you think they get the information of profits and losses? When consumers walk into stores and they pick up the goods that they want, they buy those goods. What's that information telling the business? Well, at the end of every month, the business has got the information of their profits. What is profits? Profits is the information of the goods that they're selling most of. The consumer is directly telling the producer, here's what we want more of. You should produce more of this because this is what we're buying most of. It's not indirect. It's direct communication. So anyway, folk, if you've got any questions you would like to ask, comment in the comment section below. Thank you for watching my video, and I shall talk to you later. Cheers.